Henry Walker had lived all his life on a stretch of farmland passed down through 3 generations of his family. Set in the wide plains of the American Midwest, the land was golden in summer and brown in winter, always caught in the endless cycle of planting and harvesting. Each morning, Henry woke before dawn to tend to the animals and check the fields. The work was tough, but it was honest, and he found contentment in the rhythms of nature. One late autumn day, Henry decided to clear an old, unused section of the farmland. It was a corner littered with rocky soil and debris, and, according to his grandmother's stories, had once been the site of a small homestead that burned down decades before Henry was born. The sun hung low in the sky as he thrust his shovel into the ground, unearthing stubborn roots and broken bricks. He was tired and a bit wary. Rumors had circulated for years about strange objects occasionally surfacing in that area. While digging near a half-buried stone, his shovel hit something metallic that made a sharp clang. Bending down, he brushed away the dirt to reveal a small box, battered with age. Inside lay an antique pocket watch, its once shiny casing tarnished with rust and soil. Henry felt an unexplainable tug of curiosity. Though it looked like a relic, he couldn't help but notice the face was almost pristine. The watch's glass cover was smooth, and the numbers on its dial remained clear. Henry lifted the watch from its container, examining it in the fading light. Its second hand, a delicate sliver, stood frozen between 2 seconds. Without thinking, he wound the small knob on the side. Suddenly, the second hand sprang to life with a soft ticking that seemed louder than it should have been. It was as though the watch's gears were grinding in his ears, echoing through his skull. Confused, yet intrigued, Henry pocketed the timepiece and decided to head home. That night, Henry sat in his old rocking chair by the fireplace, turning the watch over in his hands. The rhythmic ticking felt off somehow. Slower one moment, then faster the next, like a heartbeat losing its steady pace. When he finally stood up to set it on the mantel, he felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. He gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. For a moment, he thought he saw his reflection in the window shift, as though the eyes staring back at him were not entirely his. Shaking it off as fatigue, he set the watch down and trudged off to bed. The first full experience of the watch's unsettling power came the next morning. Henry woke, rose to his feet, and peered outside. Where he expected to see the familiar farmland under a dawn sky, he saw a blazing midday sun. Panicked, he glanced at the clock on his bedside table. According to it, it was only 6 in the morning. Alarmed, he checked the antique watch. Its hands spun erratically for a few seconds, then stopped at what should have been 6 o'clock. And yet, outside, the sun was high. Feeling a nervous tremor in his chest, Henry hurried outside. His fields were in full bloom, though the harvest season had just ended. Corn stalks that had been cleared weeks ago now stretched tall, as though time had leaped backward or forward without explanation. He even noticed new footprints in the dusty road near the barn, prints that didn't match his boots or those of anyone he knew. They were large and oddly spaced, as if whoever made them walked with an unhuman gait. Every tick of the watch from that day on seemed to bring new changes. Sometimes Henry blinked and found himself trudging through knee-deep snow, even though it was supposed to be autumn. Other times, he heard the laughter of people who weren't there, voices echoing in the halls of his farmhouse as though it was filled with guests from a bygone era. On 2 occasions, he left the house only to find that his tractor had vanished, replaced by an old horse-drawn plow that looked straight out of the 19th century. Stranger still were the appearances of silhouettes he couldn't quite describe. Late at night, shapes formed at the edge of his vision, flickering like candle flames. They didn't speak, but he felt their presence like a static charge in the air. When he tried to approach, they melted into the walls or vanished around corners. In the quiet hours, the watch's ticking grew louder, echoing through the rooms of his farmhouse like a distant drumbeat. Determined to break free from this disorienting cycle, Henry decided to experiment. He would hold the watch carefully and try to stop the second hand with gentle pressure. Sometimes this seemed to freeze time, but only for an instant. The world grew hushed, and even the wind ceased to blow. In that suffocating silence, he sensed something stirring beyond the veil of his reality. He felt eyes, hundreds of them, watching him from the dark spaces between moments. When the watch's hand slipped free again, time lurched forward violently, and Henry sometimes found himself hours or days away from where he started. In a desperate attempt to regain control, Henry locked the watch in an old chest in his attic. He reasoned that if he couldn't see or hear it, maybe he could live normally again. But the ticking seeped through the chest's thick wood and vibrated in his mind at night. In his dreams, he wandered through endless corridors lined with mirrors, each reflecting a different era. Some mirrors showed him as a boy picking apples alongside his father. Others revealed a future he couldn't comprehend. Towering spires where farmland should have been, neon lights flickering in the distance. In every reflection, that watch was in his hand, the ticking a steady torment. As the days wore on, Henry realized that simply hiding the watch was not enough. The more he tried to suppress its power, the more these mysterious entities seemed to gain strength in his world. They manifested in broad daylight now, dark figures flickering in the barn, peering from behind rusted farm equipment. His animals sensed it too. Horses whinnied in agitation, and cattle refused to graze in certain pastures. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Henry stood at the threshold of his home and watched the skies. They were streaked with colors he had never seen, violets so deep they bordered on black, and orange hues that glowed like molten metal. The watch was in his hand, ticking in perfect rhythm with his heartbeat. He felt he had no choice but to confront its power directly. He strode out to the old section of the farmland where he'd first discovered the watch. The moon rose, illuminating the broken bricks and remnants of the burned homestead. Taking a deep breath, Henry placed the watch on a smooth stone. He lifted his hammer high, intent on smashing it to pieces once and for all. But the second he brought the hammer down, a jolt of energy pulsed through the ground. His vision blurred as the watch's face began to glow with an unearthly light. Henry stumbled back. The world around him flickered. A moonlit field one moment, a barren wasteland the next. He saw towering cities rise and fall in rapid succession. Wild vegetation swallowed roads in an instant, then vanished, replaced by desert plains. The watch vibrated on the stone, its hands spinning faster than ever, as if it was unraveling time itself. A terrible wind kicked up dust and debris, forcing Henry to shield his eyes. When he looked again, the watch hung in midair, suspended as if an invisible hand held it. Darkness expanded outward from its center, forming a vortex that twisted the air into a maelstrom. Henry tried to run, but the pull was too strong. He felt his boots leave the ground, his body sucked toward that swirling mass. He tried to cling to a broken pillar, but a strange energy coursed through his hands, numb and tingling, until he let go. Inside that vortex, Henry caught glimpses of the entities that had stalked him. Shadowy forms weaving through the currents of time, feeding off each violent shift of reality. Their eyes glowed with a dim, unnatural light, and in their presence, every sense of normalcy drained from his mind. He realized then that the watch did more than just bend moments. It had summoned these shapes, given them purpose, and now they were completing their hold on him. With one final surge, Henry was dragged fully into this unknown realm. The color drained from his surroundings until only black and white remained. Familiar sounds melted into a distorted wail. He tried to call for help, but his voice fell silent in the chaotic roar. The watch, still floating, seemed to pulse with faint light, as if acknowledging his final surrender. Then, everything stopped. The wind died, the vortex closed. The farmland lay silent under the pale moon, seemingly unchanged. Only a faint whisper of the watch's ticking lingered in the cool night air. Henry Walker was nowhere to be found. In the months that followed, neighbors came by to check on the old farmhouse. They found half-finished chores and an empty home. Friends speculated that he might have gone to stay with relatives, but no one truly believed that story. The farmland itself felt abandoned and oddly still, as if time itself had taken a step back from the place. Only one thing remained out of place in that lonely stretch of land: a small, antique pocket watch. It lay on a smooth stone, silent and unmoving. Its hands were stuck at an indeterminate hour, forever pointing to a time that no longer existed. Sometimes, if the wind blew just right, passers-by claimed they heard it start ticking again, a faint, rhythmic pulse that suggested Henry Walker was not entirely gone, but merely elsewhere, adrift in the fractures of time. No one dared to wind that watch again. It remained a mystery, a testament to the silent power of things best left buried. Visitors kept their distance, and local legends sprang up, warning against disturbing the restless soil of the Walker farm. Whatever had happened to Henry, whatever he had seen beyond the boundaries of the ordinary world, remained locked in the watch's unmoving hands, an echo of moments lost, never to be reclaimed. Yet, on quiet nights, when the moon is high and the wind seems to whisper through the old wheat fields, some claim they can still feel a presence. The watch's secret tick echoes in that presence, an invitation and a warning all at once. It reminds the living that time, in all its vast and unpredictable nature, is not something to be toyed with. And sometimes what we find buried in the earth can unravel everything we know.